How many of you have ever been to, you've been to Jamaica? Anybody ever been to Jamaica? All right, a few of you have. Several years ago, Darlene and I and our children were young. My folks, every year, they have 4 kids. Every year they would take their family, one of their kids and their families on a kind of a big vacation, so they'd rotate around. And this particular year, they chose to take us to Jamaica. We had never been to Jamaica, and we went to this place down in Jamaica. It was fabulous. We had a great time. Very blessed. And on one particular day, we had this guy at the resort that said, man, I want to take your family and kind of cruise around on the resort boat. We're going to show you another part of the island. And we were a little skeptical, but we went ahead and did it. And we got to this place, and if you've ever been in Jamaica, there is this place called Rick's, and people jump off of cliffs into this really deep area of water. And so I've got my wife, my mom and my dad, my wife, my 3 children on this little bitty like ski boat. He said, now, come on, man, who's going to go jump? I felt the pressure. I felt like the pressure was on me that I got to be the guy to go and jump. Because David Jr.'s hand went up, and he was like 6 years old. So anyway, David and I jump in the water. David Jr. and I do. We swim over to the area. We walk up the steps, and they have like platforms set up. And the first platform seemed high enough, but the pressure was on to say, I will be the one that will jump. And David Jr. jumped off the small platform, and I go up to this high platform. And I'll tell you, I was scared. I was scared. Matter of fact, I'm going to show you a video of what we're talking about. It wasn't me jumping. It's just a video we grabbed to show you kind of what we're talking about. This is the place where I jumped. Isn't that cool? So listen, if you're ever in Jamaica and you want to go jump, there's the place to go jump, and you'll have a lot of fun. Now, the reason I wanted to start with this illustration is I want to get you thinking about something we're going to talk about today. Maybe you've heard this phrase before. Somebody comes to you and goes, man, I'm a Christian. I want to go into the deep end. Man, I want to go deep. Maybe you've heard that. I've heard it many times. Today, we're going to jump into the deep end. And nobody's wearing floaties today. We're jumping into the deep end, and we're going to swim around in the deep end for a few moments. Is that okay with everybody? And if you're not a deep Christian yet, man, I promise you, this is going to be good for you because I'm going to take you in the deep end, and it's always good to swim with people that have already been swimming in the deep end. So we're going to jump in to the deep end water. We're going to make it very simple, but I'm going to give you a challenge today because we're going to wrap up what we're talking about called I Will. It's been a one sermon preached over the last 4 weeks. We're going to wrap it up today because one of the things I've learned in ministry, and I've been in pastoral ministry now for a number of years, but I began to watch a trend even when I was in corporate America, when I came out of school. There was a trend that took place in corporate America as well as now in the life of the church. I think it came into the church a few years later. But churches wanted to say, here's what our mission statement is. Or corporate companies would say, this is the mission of our company. And we, too, have established a mission statement here at the church. But Jesus himself established a mission statement. For his life and time on earth, he had a mission statement. And we're going to look at that in just a few moments. Now, let me set the story so that you've got a feel for it. Jesus is traveling through a town or a city called Jericho, headed to Jerusalem. I'm going to give you context. It would be the equivalent of going from here in terms of mileage. Just think of it as going from here to about the turnpike on-ramp over in the Leesburg, Mineola area. If you know where the 27 turnpike is, where you get on the turnpike there, that's the distance we're talking about. Jesus is going to come into the town of Jericho. There's going to be some ministry take place in Jericho, and then he's going to begin the ascent up into Jerusalem. He's going to a festival. It's called the Passover. He's on his way there, and what we know is in this 16 or 17, maybe as many as 18, depending on how many times you go around Mount Olive, there's going to be this ministry that takes place in the course of the walk. Now, when you think about this, because if you know the demography or the geography of Israel, you've got to the northeast, so you've got Jerusalem here that sits about 2,700, 2,800 feet above sea level. It's way up. And then you descend down these 16 to 18 miles to Jericho towards the Dead Sea, which is going to be about 875 feet below sea level. So, I mean, you're coming out of the heights down to the lowest. This trip that Jesus is about to take is going to go up into Jerusalem. So he's leaving Jericho, coming up into Jerusalem. Well, while he's in Jericho, something significant happens. That's where we're going to jump into the deep end. Here's what happens. He meets this family. Now, he has healed somebody in the town. And again, if you've ever seen something supernatural, Jesus does something that only God can do, and he heals somebody right there on the spot. And as a result of it, a large crowd of people gather around because they want to figure out what he's doing. And here's what happens in Luke chapter 19. We're going to have it on the screen for you, starting in verse number 1. Jesus entered into Jericho, which I've given you the context of, and he made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. Say that word with me. Zacchaeus. Anybody ever heard of this guy before? 7 of you? Wow, I thought maybe more people had heard of Zacchaeus. Okay, I was mistaken. This will really be good today. I'm going to teach you somebody brand new, a guy named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector, the IRS, the head guy. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very what? Now, I think some of you were slow to raise your hand. You were still processing jumping off of a cliff in Jamaica. So let me just kind of backtrack here. I'm going to assume most of you in this room have heard about Zacchaeus. If you grew up in Sunday school or you went to VBS or maybe somebody had flannel graph on the wall, there were all these normal-looking sized people, and then they always had this little bitty guy named Zacchaeus. So Zacchaeus is the guy. Now, when I was preparing this, I had a thought about this. I don't think I've ever thought about it before, but I thought about this, Leo. I thought, whoever wrote the song, you remember singing the song? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. Remember that song? Imagine being the songwriter, and you're a Christian. You've given your life in faith, and you go to heaven. And you're walking into heaven, and there's been a guy for 2,000 years waiting on you. And he walks up to you. Why'd you have to write a song and immortalize me as a wee little man? I don't know. That was my thought this week. So Zacchaeus, I don't know if he was a wee little man, but he certainly was short in stature. And we also know that Zacchaeus has got some prominence in the community. He's not liked, but he's got prominence. Maybe even people live in fear of him. They really don't like him. And you can just imagine that in Jericho, if you were a dad or a mom in Jericho raising children, and dads, you leave your home to go down to the marketplace to work every day, and you have to walk by the wee little man's house, Zacchaeus. And you see, man, Zacchaeus has a home much larger than yours. He's got a much better playground in the backyard than your playground. I mean, he's got the built-in pool with the spa. Zacchaeus has got a lot. He's a rich guy. And you walk by every day his home thinking, man, he built that home on my hard work. I'm just telling you, there were people that didn't like this guy. As a matter of fact, Zacchaeus, in this particular day, tax collectors were known by this word that we use commonly in our Christendom today. He was known as a sinner. How would you like your title to be? You're Joe the Sinner. Now, we're all sinners in the room. But to be identified in the community, hey, I'm David, I live in Tavares, I'm David the Sinner. That'd be pretty brutal, wouldn't it? But that's the label that Zacchaeus has. Why? Because he lives with a greed in him, sin, that everybody in the community knows about because he keeps taking from them to build his own lifestyle. Does everybody get it? So here's this Zacchaeus. Although short in stature, large in prominence in the community. He's doing just fine. He's got plenty of money. And in this culture where a tax collector is known for greed, and maybe even, I'll use this word, stealing from people, this is the guy we're talking about. Verse 3. Zacchaeus tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short. He was too short to see over the crowd. This notorious sinner, Zacchaeus, who lived in his nice Jericho mansion. You know, when you read verse number 3, it starts to press us to a lot of questions. Why does the rich guy who's got, if you will, everything, want to see Jesus? I mean, he's got everything he needs. He's got the boat in the back. He takes it down to the Dead Sea now and then. He vacations as much as he wants because he's living off of your hard work. So why would this notorious sinner, whom the crowd has gathered to follow Jesus because of what Jesus has done, why would he even place himself in an environment where everybody, if I could, the crowd is cheering Jesus on, or at least checking it out? Why even place himself in that environment knowing that people don't like him, don't want him around? And yet verse 3 just drew me in. He just wanted to get a look at Jesus. What about you? Any desire to see Jesus? I mean, is there something driven deep in your soul that says, man, I just want to see Jesus? Or did you just come to church to check the box today and go, you know what? I'm doing a good thing. I went to church today. By the way, I think it's a good thing to get together and go to church. But there's more to this than coming to church. That's why I told you we're going to jump into the deep end today. And you and I, perhaps, like the crowd, might look at a guy like Zacchaeus and think, you don't belong here, man. This is for those of us that are Jesus followers. I don't know if maybe you're one of these people and you've got money, whatever that means. We all can define money differently. Maybe you've got some wealth. Here's what we know about Zacchaeus. Is it possible, and again, I'm just trying to break this passage down today. I think I can keep it in the context by saying this. Is it possible that Zacchaeus was having some sleepless nights? He's a sinner and a notorious one at that. Everyone knows he's taken their money to build his own empire. Could it be that Zacchaeus had had some restless nights knowing that what he's doing isn't right? I mean, after all, he's grown up in a Jewish home. He knows Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the first 5 books of the law. He understands it. He understands the Jewish culture that one day a Messiah would come. He gets it, and yet he chooses willingly to be a thief and steal from his brothers for his own personal gain. And everyone in the community knows it. How'd you like to be the neighbor of that guy? Maybe they graffitied his wall now and then. And perhaps Zacchaeus had become restless. Maybe he felt lonely because his neighbors to the left, the right, around the corner, they didn't want anything to do with him because nobody wanted to hang out with the notorious town sinner. But here he is in verse number 3, seeking Jesus. And it's interesting that the crowd has not even recognized that Zacchaeus, at least to this point, hasn't even recognized that Zacchaeus is in their presence. Because had they realized, hey, Zacchaeus is trying to get a good look at Jesus, they may have just said, hey, dude, there's no place for you here. This is where the religious group gets together. It's interesting to me that typically those who are outside the faith, outside the family of God, whatever phrase you want to put on it, sometimes have a more difficult time getting through the religious crowd to Jesus. Because the religious crowd wants to keep it just a group for the found and not for the lost. Ouch. Could it be that one of the biggest barriers in a lost person's life, and again, if you don't know what I mean by lost, I'm sorry, I don't have time to unpack that. Lost is just simply somebody that's without Christ. But could it be that one of the biggest barriers to lost people finding Jesus is that the found don't let them in? They don't look like us. They don't smell like us. They don't drive a car like us. They don't dress like us. They haven't brushed their teeth, and I brush mine. They don't comb their hair. I comb mine. And by the way, could I just say, perhaps there is in the 21st century Western culture church a growing resistance from the religious crowd to embrace and accept those who are different from them. And they've got tattoos. They got a whole sleeve of tattoos. They've got a piercing on their lip and in their nose and 7 around their ear. How could they possibly fit in with us? Can I just say, man, I hope we're never that church. Ever, ever, ever. So Zacchaeus ran ahead, verse 4. So Zacchaeus ran. Say the word ran. I want to make sure you're with me. Ran. He ran ahead and he climbed. Let's say that word together. Climbed. He climbed a sycamore tree, fig tree, beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. So we've got a grown, dignified pillar of a man in the community. A businessman who's running through the crowd and climbing a tree. Now, I find humor in that. Maybe I'm the only one. But can I just, I'm going to press pause, and I did that in my notes. David, press pause right here. If you're not a part of the fellowship family yet, and we want you to know, we want you to be a part of the fellowship family. Wherever you're coming from, we want you to be a part of this because we just believe God's given an extraordinary opportunity in this day and time and in this region to reach people for Him. But for those of you that are a part of the vision and the mission and the trajectory of the fellowship, can I just talk to you for a minute? Everybody else, if you're just kicking the tires on us, you're welcome to listen in to some family talk. But if you want to process your weekly activities and your to-do list and what you're having for lunch, feel free at this time to do so. So to our fellowship family, those of you that call this place your church, We are about 18 months old into this church plant called the Fellowship at 473. And there have been Sundays or events even, but let's talk Sundays specifically. There have been some Sundays where we've had challenges with seating in this place. Right, Art? Where we've had to pull chairs out or whatever. We've actually had Sundays here where I'll hear it later that somebody came in to the service and there weren't 4 seats together, and they left. We had an incident several months ago. This is only the Fellowship family. All you that are visiting, man, enjoy making your lunch list. I don't want you to hear this side of it. We had a family come to visit several weeks ago that wanted 4 seats together and walked up and asked some folks to move down, and nobody would move. So they left. I know we all go, oh, no, not us. Now today, you got your seat. But I want to address that I believe what God is doing in the life of the Fellowship is God has brought a group of people together, you, us, some that aren't even here, maybe they're traveling. By the way, June, you sent out a thing from Tom Rayner this week. I think it was from Tom, wasn't it? Tom Rayner about how difficult the summer months are on churches today. Giving goes down, attendance goes down, all that stuff. I read it. In our context, according to his charts, we probably would land somewhere around the 30% down in giving, down in attendance during summer months, based on demographics and all that stuff. But here's my point with what God is doing in our lives. We have to, as a church family, minimize the distractions because people need Jesus. We have to minimize the distractions. There's been services here on a Sunday where somebody couldn't get a parking spot anywhere near the building. And if you know anything about this area, when it rains hard, it rains hard. And it can get muddy and wet in some of the areas here, and people pull into a muddy, wet spot and don't want to get out to walk into church in their shoes. And that creates a challenge. That's a distraction for some people. We're working on a solve. If you were here last Sunday, I walked you through our entire vision and roadmap last Sunday and gave it to you in print. But every week around here, as a new church plant, we are seeing people, and maybe even on this day, people walking in, checking it out for the first time, or people checking Jesus out for the first time. We must minimize the distractions so that they have an open view and they don't have to run and climb into a sycamore tree to check it out. Does that make sense? Now we're getting deep in. Because what can happen is the found can create a club. There's no club in the family of God. The only club is the Jesus Club. So whether you wear tennis shoes to church or stilettos to church, girls. I should make that distinction. Maybe not. Whether you've got a sleeve or no tattoo, whether you've got a piercing or no piercing, whether your hair is long or short or buzzed off or no hair, it doesn't, whether your skin color is one color or a different color. I want you to know if you grew up in a country different than the United States and you've landed here, you're welcome in this place. By the way, I don't write the mail, I'm just the mailman today. But it is important that every man, every woman, and every child, regardless of where they're coming from, whether their bank account is overdrawn or it's loaded, doesn't matter in this place. Whether you've got new shoes or old shoes. I don't know why I keep going to shoes, but shoes are my thing today. Now here's what happens. I, like some of you, we invest in a relationship. It could be a neighbor. It could be a family member. It could be a coworker. We invest in a relationship, and we pray, and we finally get them to say, I will come. Can you imagine if that friend that you've prayed for, invested in for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, finally were to show up at church? What if they have a bad experience? You're going to be angry. You're going to call me. You're going to email me. You're going to PM me. Hey, Pastor, just a heads up, man. Out in the parking lot today, my folks came, and when we went to lunch, they said it was a bad experience because they got flicked off. Somebody showed them the tallest finger on their hand because they pulled into their parking spot. Nobody's got a parking spot around here. Nobody owns a spot. Nobody owns a seat in this place. There's people in this room that give financially a lot more money than some give. But by the way, let's remember the widow's mite. For some, it may be a greater sacrifice and it's less in coin, but a greater sacrifice. There's not partiality in this place. Man, I've sat down and prayed with our elders, talked to our elders. I know our deacons. I just met with them Monday night. Listen, this is an extraordinary leadership team around here. This is an incredible group of people. There's some of the most amazing people that serve. I get to see them every Sunday morning. We have a little meeting together. But we can never get to a spot where people cannot find Jesus in this place. We don't ever want them to have to walk in and filter their way through the found so they can seek him. They should be able to walk in, feel welcomed, loved, and embraced. That's our whole series that we're talking about. I will be someone that will follow Jesus, and I will help create an environment to bring people to Jesus. When we talk about minimizing distractions, it's interesting to me that we can pay 10 or 12 or 15, or maybe you go on senior day on Tuesday night and you go to the movie theater and it's $6, whatever your price tag is, and you go to the movie theater. And if you've ever observed pre-movie, there is a whole bunch of advertisements going, and then there's going to be this really funny clip to minimize distractions. They're going to say something like, turn your cell phones off. And they're going to have something funny about that. It's like M&M's guys or Coca-Cola people, and they're telling you, listen, we have to minimize the distractions. I need you to hear that, regardless of age in this room. We have to minimize the distractions for people that are seeking Jesus. The crowd wanted to see Jesus, and this little businessman that was not liked in the community, man, he's running through there. I can't see him. There's too many people. He climbs up in a tree because he's seeking Jesus. Verse number 5, when Jesus came by, holy cow, he looked up at Zacchaeus. Can you imagine the eyes of Jesus? He looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. So Jesus calls Zacchaeus by name. And Jesus wants to go and hang out at his house. He has no problem associating with the biggest sinner in the community. Now, I don't know, but I can only imagine when I start to parse out this passage of Scripture what the crowd must have thought. I mean, there could have been all kinds of rumbling. We know there was rumbling. You just read the rest of the passage. And it could have been things like, oh, sure, go to the rich guy's house. Jesus must have some needs financially. What are you going to the sinner's house for? Man, we've already committed our lives to follow you. Why don't you come to our house, man? Zacchaeus quickly climbed down, took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. Can you imagine this short gentleman, businessman, isolated from the community? Nobody likes him because he's stealing their money. How he must have felt. By the way, I even had the thought here. Could there have been a little arrogance there? So you did want to go to my house. I don't know. But I think based on the passage, I think we'll understand a little bit more of his demeanor. But the people, verse 7, were displeased. The church crowd was displeased. He's gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner, they grumbled. How dare you, Jesus? Don't you know that we were more like you? It's interesting to me when you stop at verse number 7 and you read the first 7 verses, two things jump off the page at me. One, the notorious sinner is excited to be in the presence of God, and the religious crowd is displeased that a sinner is coming to God. Yowzer. I don't like that. It doesn't feel good. Living on mission in our life can be challenging. Why? Because we're all sinners. And we all have to be embracing those who are sinners. Whether they're in the family or outside the family, we are all sinners. Some have accepted the cross, and some are still trying to figure it out. They're seeking. Listen, every person in this room is broken and messed up. We talked about it last week. Every one of us are in need of Jesus. But living a life that is on mission according to the way that the New Testament is designed and the commission that God has given us to go into all of the world and reach every person with the gospel, I'm just going to tell you, if you live your life on mission with God, you will get criticized by the church crowd. Woohoo! I love that. You will. You're going to get criticized by those who are already found. I wish it weren't that way, but it is. We're going to change that culture in the fellowship culture. We started it with a church plant 18 months ago. That every person is going to be welcome in this place. Whether that sinner has been found or that sinner is still lost from God, all will be welcome. People that need Jesus need to be able to find him in this place and through us. It's not negotiable. Meanwhile, verse 8. Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, quote, I'll give half of my wealth to the poor, Lord. And if I've cheated people on their taxes, I'll give them back 4 times as much. Wouldn't you love to get that letter from the IRS? Wouldn't you love better to get the check back? And Jesus responded, oh man, this is so good. Salvation has come to this home today. For this man has shown himself to be a true son of who? Abraham. Isn't that an interesting phrase? He's shown himself to be a true son of Abraham because he's a Jewish man. He grew up in Jewish culture. He went to school as a Jewish boy. He understood that now he's on the outside because he's a notorious sinner, and the outside community, his Jewish friends and family, have said, we want nothing to do with you. And Jesus said, salvation's come to you today. And oh, by the way, Abraham's your dad, your father. You're in the bloodline, if you will. Now, for the Son of Man, here it is, the mission statement of Jesus. Jesus came to seek and save those who are lost. Zacchaeus is one of them, and many others. And there it is. It's interesting that in our day and age, music has become a point of contention in the church. And the churches have different styles. We have a style here. We call it a modern style. Sometimes we call it young and free. Sometimes we pattern after a church called Elevation, sometimes with our music style, or Fellowship out of Dallas, or Hillsong out of Australia. We track all of that stuff. And what's interesting is in all of the style changes of music, and in this room there's style changes. People have preferences. I get all that. There was this guy that wrote a song. His name was John Newton. He was an English poet. In the late 1700s, he wrote a song that had some interesting lyrics to it. I think we're going to put them up on the screen for you. I don't know if you've ever heard of this song, but it says, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see. Our religious community, just a few years ago, a group of church leaders put together an investigation group and wanted to revise the lyrics of this old 1700s hymn from John Newton. One of the revisions they wanted to make was to take out the term wretch. Now, I don't have a particular position on this issue, but it's interesting that this word wretch was used, and again, this is an old English term. And so I dove a little bit deeper, and I knew a little bit about the song. And one of the things about this John Newton is that he had no problems as an English Navy man, boasting, bragging in his journal of being rebellious, hating God. He was known by his shipmate buddies as having one of the filthiest mouths on the boat. Just swore all the time. Matter of fact, in his own self-admission and known historically, he was a slave trader. And then he also alludes to a time where he and his buddies brought some women on the ship and raped them. This is the guy that wrote a song that's beloved by so many in the church. Now, if somebody like that wretch wrote a worship song today, how would we view that? Pastor, don't you know the guy that wrote that song? I mean, I don't know John Newton. What I know is that at some point in his life, he gives his life in faith to Jesus Christ, praise God, and he writes these lyrics. And he uses the word wretch. Can I just say to you and I, we are all a wretch. All of us. And we need the amazing grace of our Savior. Although John Newton wrote these lyrics, and guys like Zacchaeus ran and was seeking Jesus, so much so that a businessman was willing to climb a tree to see him. I was a 17-year-old high school athlete. I gave my life to Jesus. Maybe you're here today and you've not given your life to Jesus yet, or maybe you have and you're in pursuit of him, or maybe you're still checking it out. I want to say to you, man, you've come to a place that we want to help you find him. If you've been seeking, you're searching, we're not asking you to climb a sycamore tree today. We're opening up and saying, man, you're welcome to this place. What's interesting to me is we'll never be excited about being found until we come to terms with being lost. When you can get excited about being found by Jesus, it's because you understand your lostness. There was a social media craze about a year ago at this time. It went viral. As a matter of fact, multiple platforms had over 20 million views on a particular video. Maybe you saw this video. I'm just going to show you a portion of this video about a little girl that got adopted. Check this out.
All right, well, there's one more gift.
We have one more gift.
It's not from Grammy, but it's another gift. Why don't you careful open it up. Here we go. I want you to read it.
I'm going to be adopted.
We love you, sweetheart. We'll always be your
I
parents.
love you so much. I love you.
We love you, sweetheart. We'll always be your parents. Okay? We'll always be your real family. We love you.
I get to take care of you, protect you, and Kylie too. I love you so much. Can you believe it? God is too good.
I don't know if you could understand everything that the mom and dad were saying to their little girl. They were saying things like, we're here to protect you. You're ours now. Our family is your family. We love you unconditionally. Does that sound like someone you've heard before? Jesus. Listen, the hair on my arms are standing up right now. Because here's the beauty of the cross and the church. Jesus is seeking you. That's what his mission statement was. I have come to seek and to save those who are lost. Your age doesn't matter. Your skin color doesn't matter. The country of origin doesn't matter. Your past sins don't matter. Your bank account doesn't matter. The neighborhood you live in and the car you drive doesn't matter. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save those who are lost. And to wrap up our series called I Will, I want to remind you, this is the mission of the New Testament church. This expression called the fellowship. The fellowship is on mission to ensure that every man, every woman, and every child will have a repeated opportunity to see, hear, and respond to the greatest news known to mankind. Jesus saves. Would you say, I will, to Jesus?